Welcome! Tonight, we're diving into a single act of protest, one that involved 46 tons of tea, a moonlit harbor, and, well, a rebellion that literally changed the world. We're heading back to Boston, 1773, to see how the Boston Tea Party didn't just kickstart a revolution, it actually brewed up some of the very words we still use today. So, let's start with the words of a guy who would go on to become the second president of the United States, John Adams. He scribbled this down in his diary the very next day. I mean, he knew right away that this wasn't just some random riot. No, this was a major turning point, or as he called it, an epocha in history. So why? Why would hundreds of regular, law-abiding colonists do something so extreme? I mean, commit such a massive act of destruction? Well, to get to the bottom of that, we've got to rewind a bit and look at the storm that had been brewing for years across the 13 American colonies, which were all under British rule. Okay, so it all boils down to this one super powerful phrase: no taxation without representation. Think about it. The colonists were basically saying, hey, how can a government thousands of miles away tax us when we don't have anyone over there in Parliament to actually speak for us? For them, it wasn't just about money, it was a fundamental violation of their rights. And the whole conflict really came to a head with something called the Tea Act of 1773. Now, Britain didn't just pass this law to make money from taxes. Nope. It was also a massive bailout for the East India Company, which was struggling financially. The act gave them a total monopoly on tea, and this was a huge problem. It threatened to put all the local colonial merchants, and yeah, even the smugglers, right out of business. So as you can imagine, people were not happy. But before they resorted to throwing tea into the harbor, the colonists actually tried to do things the peaceful way. They sent these formal written requests, we call them petitions, over to King George III and to Parliament. They were basically pleading their case, asking for the taxes to be removed. But what happened? They were just ignored, over and over again. It really left people feeling like they had no voice at all. Okay, so with all the peaceful options exhausted, the stage was set for something big. It's December 16th, 1773. The clock is ticking. The deadline to pay the tax on all this new tea is midnight. You've got thousands of people packed into Boston's Old South Meeting House, and the tension in the city, you could cut it with a knife. It was just unbearable. And what happened next? Look, this was not just a bunch of people mindlessly breaking stuff. Not at all. It was a carefully planned, symbolic act of defiance. It was a message, a loud, clear, and very bold message sent straight to the top, to the king and the entire British Empire. So, who were the people who marched down to the harbor that night? Well, they weren't just some random mob. No way. This was an organized group of patriots called the Sons of Liberty. And they were from all walks of life. We're talking carpenters, printers, shopkeepers. And the disguises? They dressed up as Mohawk Indians for a couple of reasons. First, it was practical. It protected their identities. Because, hey, this was treason. But it was also symbolic. It was their way of saying, we are Americans, not British subjects. So, for the next 3 hours, they got to work. They boarded the 3 ships docked there at Griffin's Wharf, the Dartmouth, the Eleanor, and the Beaver, and this whole thing was surprisingly orderly. They hoisted up 342 of these massive, heavy chests, smashed them open with axes, and then dumped every single bit of tea right into the Boston Harbor. Now let's try to wrap our heads around that number. 92,000 pounds. That is 46 tons of tea. That's enough to make something like 18 million cups of tea. We're talking about an insane amount of valuable stuff totally destroyed in just one night. I love this. People at the time joked that they'd turned Boston Harbor into the world's biggest teapot. And what about the cost? In today's money, we're talking about a loss of around $1.7 million. So this wasn't just some minor protest. This was a massive financial blow, a direct hit right to the wallet of the East India Company. And it was an unmistakable challenge to the economic might of Great Britain. So, about a month later, news of what they called the destruction of the tea finally reaches London. And the reaction from Parliament? Oh, it wasn't, let's talk this out. Not even close. It was pure, unfiltered fury. They were absolutely livid and decided that Boston, in particular, needed to be punished, and punished severely. So the British government's response was all about retaliation. Basically, they were going to hit back hard. The plan was to make a brutal example out of Massachusetts to scare any of the other colonies from even thinking about pulling a similar stunt. The goal was simple: force the colonists to back down. And you can see the huge gap between Britain and the colonies just by looking at the two different names they had for these new punitive laws. In London, Parliament called them the Coercive Acts, because they were designed to coerce or force Boston into obedience. But in America, the colonists called them the Intolerable Acts. Why? Because for them, they were just completely unbearable. I mean, these acts were brutal. They completely shut down the port of Boston, which basically killed its economy. They took away most of Massachusetts' power to govern itself. They even forced colonists to let British soldiers live in their homes. But the whole plan just backfired. Big time. Instead of isolating Boston and scaring everyone else, these intolerable laws just made everyone angry and brought all 13 colonies together like never before. So this is it. This is the moment. This clash, the colonists' act of defiance and Britain's furious retaliation, it was the final tipping point. What started as a fight over taxes was now blowing up into a full-blown movement for revolution. And from this point on, things started moving fast, really fast. Think about it. In less than a year and a half, you go from one single night of protest to all the colonies forming a unified Congress, to the first shots of the American Revolutionary War being fired at Lexington and Concord. It's an incredible escalation. And this is so important. The Boston Tea Party completely shifted the goalposts. It wasn't just about getting representation in the British Empire anymore. No, people started fighting for something way more radical: complete and total independence. The dream became about being totally free from the control of a king thousands of miles away and having the power to govern themselves. But the impact of that cold December night in Boston doesn't just live in history books. It's actually left this really cool mark on the English language. In fact, it gave us a phrase that I bet you've used without ever thinking about where it came from. It's such a brilliant example of how our language changes over time. You start with a literal event: protesters spilling tea into Boston Harbor. That action, revealing the colonists' true intentions in such a dramatic way, became associated with revealing any kind of dramatic or hidden information. And boom, today, when we say spill the tea, we mean share the gossip or tell me the secret. How cool is that? The next time you say it, you're actually referencing this huge moment in history. So think about what we've just done. By digging into this one single story, you haven't just relived a crucial moment in history. You've also picked up a whole new vocabulary for talking about protest and change. Words like rebellion, defiance, retaliation, unity, independence, these all describe conflict, politics, and the fight for freedom. And those are ideas that are just as powerful today as they were back in 1773.
Which really leaves us with this final, big question. The Boston Tea Party, it was never really about the tea, was it? It was a dramatic, defiant, and incredibly dangerous stand for a much bigger idea. An idea that people should have a real say in their own government. An idea so powerful that people were willing to risk everything, their lives, their fortunes, to fight for it. And in the end, that's the idea that built a nation.